Going to do a session on secrets of the Bezier tool working in CorelDraw X4. You know, often we get settled into a way of working, and this is a perfect example, even myself, and then we think that we understand how something works in CorelDraw. We think we know we're doing things the most optimal way to do them, and then we take a few minutes and do some exploration and some experimentation. Within an application, we're able to discover entirely new ways to do things that save us a lot of time, improve our accuracy, and so on. And I came across some of this a short time ago with the Bezier tool. And for years, I had thought that I had a really good understanding of the Bezier tool. And one day I was sitting there and I just had this thought. I wonder, what these shortcuts are. I knew some Shift and Alt and stuff like that, but I started pressing all of the keys on the keyboard while I was working with the Bezier tool, and I came across some really powerful functionality that I really hadn't realized was there. So I want to go ahead and share that in this session. We'll call this Secrets of the Bezier tool. And the keys that we want to be aware of on our keyboard are Alt-Shift, S, C, and of course our spacebar. But to start out, we'll take a look. We've just got a simple grayscale bitmap here we want to trace. Kind of complex object here, and we won't trace the whole thing in this session. We're just going to take a look at the secrets of the Bezier tool and how we can use that in tracing a project like this. But before we get started with that, I want to take a look at some of the basic functionality that we have with these keys in the Bezier tool. So I'll go ahead, come over here to my toolbar. I'll come down to the fourth button here, and if you don't see the Bezier tool, just left click in the corner arrow. You can come right down here to the Bezier tool. Now, the Bezier tool really is my go-to tool for hand tracing, vector illustration, a lot of work in CorelDraw. Now, whenever I have the opportunity, I'm of course going to go to shapes, because they're going to make my work a lot faster. If I'm tracing fonts, you're going to see me in shapes most of the time. But if I've got to have real control over my lines and nodes, I'm going to go to the Bezier tool. Go ahead and left click there, and that'll come up. Now the first thing we'll want to take a look at is, we'll just go ahead and scroll down here. We'll just lay down a line segment. We'll lay down two lines, and we'll analyze what vector really is composed of. Vector is composed of actually two types of objects, or I guess you could say two types of elements, and those elements would be nodes, which you can see here on each end of the line, and then there's a line here in the middle. So you've got these nodes, which are the endpoints, and then you've got a line segment. I'm going to actually go to my Object Properties Manager here, and I don't have that available, so I'm actually going to go to Window Dockers, and I'm going to go to Properties, and that'll bring up my Properties Docker. I'll come over here to my pen tool. I'm going to change this outline to 3 points, and then we'll go ahead and we'll open up our CMYK color palette tool. Go to Windows, Color Palettes, and we'll go to Default CMYK, and I'm just going to right click and give that a red, and then we'll zoom in. Now we know that when we're working with our vector lines and nodes in CorelDraw, there's some properties that can be associated with these. And you can see right now I've got this line set up, and my properties bar will change up here, and we always want to watch what's going on with our properties bar in CorelDraw, and you can see it's got Edit, Curve, Polygon, Envelope properties bar here. Now I can also get to many functions that I can change the properties or states of these lines and nodes while I'm working with them here. And if I double click here, I've got my shape tool and not my pick tool. If I double click, I can lay down a node here, and that'll create a node. Then I've got some properties. I can change it to a curve, I can plus and minus, reverse its direction, etc. So you always want to watch these properties bars in Corel when you're working in Corel, because it always changes based on what you've got selected. Now if I left click on this node and hold down with my shape tool, that'll start to move. If I right click here, I can go to curve, and you can see I've got some different properties associated now with this particular line segment. If I left click and hold down with my shaping tool, I can change the shape of that curve. I can't do that over here where I don't have curve property in that line segment. That is a line and not a curve, so when I left click and move that, I'll move just the line. Now, without getting into too much detail relating to the properties that are in these lines and nodes, we'll go ahead and take a look at the Bezier tool and how it works. So we know that we've got line segments that we can control through our properties bar, but we can actually control the properties of these line segments and nodes and what's going on with them while we're working with the Bezier tool, along with a number of other types of properties or things that we want to be aware of associated to our lines and nodes while we're tracing or drawing with the Bezier tool. So what I'll do is I'll come back to my Bezier tool here. The first thing I'm going to do is just lay down one node, and then I'll left click to lay down another node, and you'll notice now if I start to move that node, I can change the curve properties. But if while I'm moving this, I hold down my Alt key, I can also move the node now, or change the position of my node. I've got my left mouse button down, and I'm holding down my Alt key, so I can move my node while I'm working live with the Bezier tool by holding down my Alt key. If I release that, I'll go back to a smooth node here, as you can see, or a symmetrical node. Now if I hit my C key and start to move, you'll notice that now I've gone to a cusp node, and I can change the direction of the way in which my line segment is going to be attached to that node and then come off of that node. As you can see here, now if I go ahead and click again, here we go, and I hit my Alt key, I can move that node. If I release my Alt key and go to S, excuse me, not S, not hit my S key, but hit C, I'll go back to a cusp again. Now if I want to go back to symmetrical, I hit my S key and I'll go back to symmetrical, as you can see there. Now I can also hit my spacebar, that'll click off of that, and I'll go back to my pick tool, hit my spacebar again, I'll be back to my Bezier tool. I can left click here and get back and connect my Bezier tool back to my Bezier line I was drawing, lay down another node, hold down my Alt key, and I just hit the wrong keyboard shortcut there. I want to left click, connect, I hit my spacebar instead of my Alt key there. I want to hold down my Alt key, and now you see I'll be able to move my node again. If I go to my C key, as you can see there, I can start to change my shape or my direction. So there's a lot of control available to us through the keyboard, and I call these secrets of the Bezier tool, available to us through the keyboard while we're working with the Bezier tool. Now there's a number of different Bezier techniques, and you'll pick up as your own as you're going, but I just wanted to present in video some of these shortcuts that are available and that you can work with the Bezier tool. Now I'll go ahead and delete these two here, and I'm going to go to tools and options for just a minute, because there's one thing we also want to be aware of with the Bezier tool. And actually before I do that, I'm going to start working with the Bezier tool just to show you this one secret here. You left click one time, create a node, left click, create another node, we'll drag it out, left click, create another node, and drag it out. Now you notice if I come back over these nodes, nothing happens. If I want to get to my shape tool, I've got to come up here and click on that, and then I can start to edit my Bezier lines or my nodes and line segments working with this Bezier line. But if I'll go ahead and delete this. If I go to Tools and Options, go to Workspace, and we'll go to Display, and we'll click on Enable Node Tracking, as you can see there. Now if you're working with a lot of snap objects and snapping in Draw, you might have some issues with this, but I don't really like to work with the snap, so I don't use it. Select OK, and now you'll notice if I go with my Bezier tool, left click, hold down, start to create some line segments and nodes here. If I come back over the top of a node, I'll automatically convert to the shape tool. Now if I left click, I'll have the shape tool. I can actually edit my nodes, move them around, and I can actually start to manipulate my line segments. And then if I want to go back to the Bezier tool, all I have to do is left click off of my line. I'll be back to the Bezier tool, and of course I can get back to my Alt, hold down my Alt and move my node around while I'm drawing, and I can also click my C key and change my symmetrical node to a cusp node and start to affect how my line segment is passing through and interacting with that node. And if I want to go back to symmetrical, I can hit C. And I can also hit Shift, and then I'll start to rotate my node handles in a constrained fashion. And you can also see that instead of being fully symmetrical, I've got control over this one control arm's moving, but they're not. And if I hit Shift again, it'll go back. If I hit Alt, as you can see there. So you want to go ahead and experiment and spend some time working with these different key shortcuts while you're working with the Bezier tool, especially if you're using it a lot in CorelDraw. So go ahead and delete this. We've got our Enable Node Tracking turned on, and we're going to do some tracing here of this particular dragon type object. Now what I'm going to do with this, I'm going to apply some transparency to this to get started here, and we'll make that uniform, just so I'm not dealing with a solid black when I'm trying to lay down my lines. And of course I'll right click and I'll select Lock Object, so I can't select that while I'm tracing. And the first thing I'll do is I'll start tracing this wing feather segment here. So we'll go ahead and take a look at how we do that using these functions. We'll zoom in here. So go ahead and get my Bezier tool and we'll start tracing. Go down here to my toolbar, fourth button down, left click. Remember, if you don't see the Bezier tool, just left click on the little area there and then go to the Bezier tool. And we can start to lay down some lines here. And what I'll do is I'm just going to lay down an initial line here. We'll use that as a start. I want to change to a 2-point outline, and we'll right click here on our CMYK color palette to change that color so you can see what I'm working on. Now what I want to do is we'll go ahead and zoom in actually closer here so you can see really what we're working on with this line segment. Go back to my Bezier tool, left click here on the node, and I'll rejoin it. I can see I've got these control arms here. Now what I want to do is put another node up here and shape that to this curve going through here. Now once you get these techniques down, you'll be able to go through these traces very quickly and draw very quickly with the Bezier tool. But I'll be moving kind of slow here for the video. I'm just going to left click, lay down a node there, and start moving. Now I can see that I don't really quite have that particular arch exactly the way I want it, but I can deal with that simply by coming over and left clicking on a node, converting to the shape tool with that left click, and then double click here, left click, hold this node down, and then bring it just a little bit. Now if I go to view wireframe, I can see I've got that almost exactly, and I can position this node so I'm getting a very accurate or precise trace, as you can see here. Now depending on the quality of the graphic you're shooting for, you may not want to be this accurate. A lot of times you could be very close to this and that'll be just fine. We'll go back to view and enhanced. Then I'm going to go ahead and click off, and that'll bring me back to my Bezier tool because I've got enable node tracking turned on. I'll come up here and lay down another node right here, and we'll bring this out. Now I can see I'm just a little bit higher there, but if I hold my Alt key I can bring this down just a bit and then go ahead and release my Alt key, and you can see how I'm able to trace much more accurately. Same thing here, coming around this corner, left click, pull down and hold. I missed just a bit there, but I can hold down my Alt key and bring that shape right back in line there, as you can see, and I've got that almost perfect. Now working with this Alt, I'll come right up here. This is going to be straight, so I'll just left click once here and then start to drag out. Now you can see I'm getting symmetrical, but there's got some curve that's associated with the tip there. You can see that curve just a little bit, so I'll hit my C key, bring this off just a little bit. Now I don't want this arrow over here, because if I pull over this way and then click here, I'm going to get a lot more segment in my line than I want. So I'll hit Control Z, and I'll hit Control Z again. I'll lay down another node here, start pulling just a little bit, and then change to my C key, holding down my C key, and bring just a little curve here, and then click right here, and you can see I got that curve right there with my C key, holding that down. So we're working with Alt and C and S keys, etc. Now I'm going to come up here to the top. I'm going to left click and start pulling, put a little bit of curve in there, hit my C key, and then bring my arm down here so it's going to match what's going on with the angle here coming down, where the curve that I'm going to want to create down here. Go ahead and move down just a little bit here, lay down another node here, hit my Alt key, I'll bring that node right to where I want it, pull off, release my Alt key, start pulling, holding down my left mouse button, go to my C key, and then come back up this way and release. Now I can see if I don't quite have that, I can go back to my S key and start to change my shape so it matches there. See that? I'm changed it again, so I've got that line pretty well perfectly covered. Now go to my C key and then follow this line again. Come up here, lay down yet another node, start moving left, holding down my left mouse button. I'm going to hit my Alt, I'll bring that node right back into here. I've got that shape pretty good, I'm actually happy with that. And I'll go to my C key and pull this over, as you can see there, and release. Then I'll come down here, lay down another node, start pulling, hold down my Alt key, bring this node in here, release my Alt key, and start pulling until I match that line segment. So we can see, working with our Alt, our S, our C key, that we can get back and forth very quickly, changing the properties of our line segments and nodes, working live with our Bezier tool. And I could use these techniques to go right up through the eye here and the head of this particular, I guess you'd call it a bird dragon or something like that, kind of like a fashion design vintage element here. But you can see how we could use these techniques working our way through all of our tracing. So we want to be aware of these settings with our keys to know, the Alt, Shift, the S, the C, and the space bar. And of course we want to be able to go to our tools and options, and we want to be able to enable and disable node tracking. So hope this tutorial helps. Some secrets of the Bezier tool working in CorelDraw X4.